Yesterday we had a lot of deep philosophical discussions. Today will be the antidote to that. We'll try to put everything into perspective on how important philosophy actually is, what role it plays, what the limits of it are. All things that I tried to hint at yesterday. We shouldn't take it too seriously, all these different points of view and everything. This talk this morning, it's something that was actually suggested to me by Swami Prabhanandaji. This is Varun Maharaj. He's now Vice President of our order. He came to the West maybe 6-8 years ago, something like that. None of you saw him. Anyhow, he's very wonderful Swami. I've known him for many, many years. And he used to be in charge of the Institute of Culture, just for a short time. And he's the one who started the museum, the Bellarmite Museum. He did all of that work. And he's written so many books, mostly Bengali books. There's Antolila and lots of things about Shankara. He's a great historian. He did a lot of research. And, anyhow, he asked me once to write an article because the Institute of Culture has their own periodical. They put out something once a month or something like that, on the relative importance and the different roles of these different concepts, you can say, that which is a philosophical position, that which is a viewpoint, anyhow, all different things. So I came up with, and I never did it, and I always felt very, very guilty. I never wrote the article, but I thought at least let me give a talk on it. So I did it some years ago. By that time he was no longer at Institute of Culture, so I never turned it into an article. But anyhow, it seemed like a good idea to me. So what the talk purports to do is to start out kind of an ascending scale of these different aspects of conceptual thinking that we have, starting with doubt. So this would be the first thing, samshaya. So we'll start with the role of doubt, and then from samshaya we'll go to shraddha. And shraddha, in the sense of that initial need to have a very open attitude, respectful attitude of humility, all of these things. So shraddha. Then from shraddha we'll go to mata. Mata, Bengali mat, very important term for Sri Ramakrishna. This idea of having a certain position or standpoint, some philosophical grounding that we have, whether we take it as absolute truth, whether we take it as an opinion. This will be part of the discussion. So we'll have that, and then darshana. Darshan. This is the term that's used for philosophical systems, but it also has its own kind of variety of meaning. And then finally anubhuti. So direct experience, and we'll see that each one has a significant role to play, but none of them have that ultimate absolute role to play until we have God realization at the very end. So that's what will be the very final thing that we'll get to. And this is all meant to put it into perspective, all of these different questions that we have regarding the nature of Brahman, the nature of the jiva. Are there many jivas? All of these different questions. What is the relative importance of coming to any fixed conclusion regarding all of these things? And I forgot one thing, Vishwasa. So this will be before anubhuti, conviction. So we'll try to put things into a little better perspective here. Now, we'll start with Shraddha, even though the first one I mentioned was Samshaya, it was doubt. You'll find that doubt will play a role. It's very important to understand this concept of Shraddha, because it's not a concept, it's really an attitude, which is absolutely necessary. If we read Gita and other texts like that, there'll be some very, very strong language. Those who don't have the Shraddha shouldn't even hear any of these things. Right? So there's a very strong idea that those who have no respect or regard for a tradition, those who are only out to criticize and condemn things, let them alone. No need to try to convince them of anything or even give them access to certain teachings if they won't take a respectful attitude toward it. So there's Shraddha. We often translate it as faith, but I don't like this translation as faith. To me, it's more humility and reverence and regard and this attitude of openness. Suppose we read something and it doesn't make sense to us in the beginning, we don't say it's nonsense. We say, oh, I haven't yet understood it. There must be some value to it. Other people have practiced these things and great souls have written these things. So let me see what my shortcoming is and what I can change in my understanding, so I'll see the value and truth of it. Not that I'll have to follow it exactly, but at least I'll have some regard and respect for it. So this is the minimum that we need, this idea of Shraddha. We have a definition in Vedanta Sara of this. It uses the term Vishwasa as part of the definition, but I'm going to make this real distinction that one is at the very beginning and one is at the very end. Even though their meanings overlap a little bit. They do overlap. Anyhow, we get this Guru, Upadishta, Vedanta, Vakyeshu, Vishwasa. So, having faith, or at least regard and reverence, in the teachings, the words of the statements, the teachings of Vedanta, as taught by the Guru or the spiritual teacher. So it's almost always thought in terms of Shastra and Guru, that we have to have this attitude of reverence and humility, faith in the sense that there's something of a great value there. We never have this idea that we should accept something without understanding it. This is completely absent in Vedanta. Many other traditions will have that idea, that faith before reason. There's a very important concept in Christianity among certain of the teachers, that you don't question things. Just have faith, and faith is more important. Swamiji, of course, he said, you test everything. You put everything to the test of reason. Don't accept anything without... Not that reason will always be up to the task, but if something really jars us, contradicts our reason, and somebody simply says, didn't believe it. It's in the scriptures, or God said it. Because so many religious traditions believe in revelation. So if we hear that then there should be a red flag. If somebody says don't reason about it, it doesn't have to make sense. Just simply accept it. We should question that. So this idea of Shraddha doesn't mean that we don't rationally look at things and try to see if it makes sense or doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, we give it the benefit of the doubt and continue to look at it. If ultimately we say no, it doesn't make sense, then we say, well, it's not for me. We don't have to condemn it. We can just come to the conclusion that this is a path that's better suited for somebody else. So that idea. So this is the very beginning point, this attitude towards these spiritual teachings that we come into contact with, this open-mindedness, this respect for any genuine religious teacher or religious tradition, without feeling that we have to swallow everything. If it doesn't make sense to us, then we can just set it aside. We don't have to reject everything else either. Sri Ramakrishna was so practical. So practical. We'll hear others say that it's Shruti, every word of Shruti, everything you read in the scriptures has to be true. Can't possibly be false. Right? Sri Ramakrishna, he says, the scriptures are a combination of sugar and sand. He'll go right ahead and say it. He doesn't say Shruti exactly, but scriptures. Then you have to have the sense be like the ant. The ant knows that it only wants to eat the sugar. It won't eat the sand, grains of sand. So just separate it. Oops. Just separate it. You don't have to discard the whole thing. Don't lose the important part of that. There are people who, they'll read Ramayana, right? And they'll see, oh, how Rama treated Sita, and then they'll throw the whole thing away. So my idea is that, so one particular incident or aspect of his life, he probably should have defended her a little better, but the whole rest of it is of great value. We may not like that particular thing, so we don't throw the whole thing away. So this was the Sri Ramakrishna's attitude, that we be sensible with regard to all of these things. But we have to have this firm belief, if we're really willing to look at a particular spiritual tradition, there's firm belief that there's something of great value there, and that many other people who are good people, sincere people, are benefiting from it, and we don't want to just dismiss it that way. There are many other religious traditions that have many practices and things that we don't understand, that we don't see the value of it, that we feel we probably couldn't benefit from ourselves. But still, they'll have something positive to them. Sri Ramakrishna, he saw something positive in some of the traditions that were going on in his time that others would just turn their nose up at. They wouldn't walk on the same side of the street as people who followed that. This one, Vaishnav Charan. Vaishnav Charan was highly beloved by Sri Ramakrishna. They had a very loving, sweet relationship. And yet, he was the leader of this one Karata Bhaja sect. Yeah. That they would drink wine, and men and women would form couples together, and did all sorts of things. And Sri Ramakrishna had great regard for him because he saw that he was a sincere, serious person and everything, and he also loved Sri Ramakrishna very much. So many of the direct disciples would criticize all of these, the Ghoshpara, Sahajiya. There were all these different groups doing tantric practices and things. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say, no, don't criticize them. There's even a backdoor entrance into a house through the train area. In the old houses in India, most of you know it, of course, there would be, before there was plumbing, there would be a back door so that the sweeper could come and clean out the latrine and wouldn't have to go through the front door. He said, even that's an entrance into the house. So it may be that people who are doing this, they'll also reach the goal. He said, but it's not a clean path. It's not the way you want to do it. You go through the front door. But don't look down on these people. This is also a path. So he was very liberal and open-minded that way. So it's good if we can have that type of attitude, but stick to our own. So this Nishtha is the other side of it. That we want to have great devotion to the spiritual path that we ourselves choose. Now, samshaya, this idea of doubt plays a very important role in spiritual life. Now, if it's too much, if we're the type of people that were only looking for flaws, that are always looking to criticize, that are always looking to denounce things, that are always looking to show that there are flaws and the contradiction. There are people like that. You know who was like that? Chaitanya Deva. Before his conversion, when he was Nimai Pandit, he was a very proud scholar, and he loved to go around and make fun of the Vaishnavas in town, and all the other scholars he would find fault and criticize. Sri Ramakrishna says, a very interesting statement, there are 3 types of people who cannot realize God. You know what they are? One is Samshayatma, those who are skeptical in nature. It's their very nature to doubt everything. And the other is those who have the crooked mind, Bankamon, he says. And the third is Shuchibai. Yes, those who are obsessed with ritualistic purity and always taking bath and always feeling this is not pure, this is not pure. So I don't know why, but he says specifically those 3 things. He says it a few times in Gautamrita. Samshayatma, Shuchibai, and what was the third?
Bankamon.
Jar Bankamon.
Crooked mind.
Those who have a crooked mind. Yeah, that means they're always seeing things in a wrong light, and distorting things and everything. Yeah, so in Gita we have this Samshayatma Vinashyati. He just goes to ruin. Someone whose very nature it is to be always doubting things. So this is the opposite of Shraddha. So this Gita has this very strong attitude in favor of Shraddha and against this idea of skepticism. But there's something that we'll call a healthy type of doubt, which is very important in spiritual life. And this goes hand in hand with this idea of questioning things and evaluating things and making sure we understand things. And we see among Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, right, that we have a range of different attitudes. On the one hand, we have someone like Latu Maharaj. Latu Maharaj had such faith in Sri Ramakrishna that no matter what he said, he would accept. Just instantly. But that was after he knew him. It wasn't, of course, practically from the first time he saw him. But to give one example, the very common example everyone knows, that Latu Maharaj, Sri Ramakrishna called him one evening, and somebody said, "Oh, he's sleeping." It was an odd time to be sleeping. It wasn't afternoon nap time, it wasn't night time. So Sri Ramakrishna said, "Wake him up and bring him to me." So he came to him, and then he got a good scolding. He said, "What are you doing? This is a time for meditation and you're sleeping. Should you waste your whole night?" It was probably just after sunset or something. Should you waste your whole night in sleep when you could be meditating on God? So Latu Maharaj said that from that day, I took a vow to myself never to sleep at night. Just in one word that Thakur said. And he said, I sat for meditation, I felt sleepy, I got up, I put cold water in my face, I felt sleepy again, I slapped myself, I walked around, and he said finally through long practice, I conquered sleep, and the rest of his life he never slept at night. He would simply take a little nap now and then during the day, maybe get a couple hours sleep, that's all. But the whole night, and he didn't make a big thing about it. He would pretend actually he was sleeping at night. There's a nice story at Baranagar. They just had a big open hall to sleep in, no separate beds or anything, right next to each other on the floor. They put out a blanket and sleep that way. So one night, it was, I think, Swami Sharadananda, he heard something, tick, 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 tick. He thought maybe it was a mouse. So somehow he turned on the lamp, a kerosene lamp or something like that, and then it stopped. So then he put the light out again, and then again he heard tick, 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 and he he saw next to him that Latu Maharaj was sleeping, completely covered with a blanket. But he could see his hand like this somehow. And then he saw that, Latu Maharaj was doing his japa. And he heard the beads going tick, 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 tick. And then he said, "You rascal, while all of us are sleeping, you're doing your japa meditation all night long." Yeah.
Yes, Maharaj.
So that was Latu Maharaj. Then the other extreme is Swamiji. That Swamiji fought with Sri Ramakrishna. He didn't accept anything that Sri Ramakrishna said in the beginning. He came from the Brahma Samaj background. So there's so many things that were taken for granted by Sri Ramakrishna. As the Orthodox Hindu from a village, none of them would question that the Brahmas didn't accept. Even things like avatar, or the importance of the Guru. So there were so many areas in which Swamiji just wouldn't accept things that Sri Ramakrishna said. His worship of Mother Kali. Swamiji hated that. And he used to say that. He hated that Mother Kali. Yeah, he couldn't stand it. And he would think that Sri Ramakrishna, he is such a wonderful man, such a highly illumined person. He said, he still goes there. He still goes to the temple. But gradually, Swamiji came to see that everything that Thakur said was right. And he said if he hadn't questioned everything, then he wouldn't have the conviction, the same type of conviction that he had when he finally realized the truth of everything. So, he said, very nice quote, "Let none regret that they were difficult to convince. I fought my master for 6 years with the result that I knew every inch of the way. Every inch of the way." So, and it was 6 years, because even on Thakur's deathbed, doubt came, right? Yeah, and Sri Ramakrishna knew. See, there was a long period where every day Narendra would go and sit with Sri Ramakrishna all alone, just the two of them. And Sri Ramakrishna would give him instructions. Swamiji never told us exactly what he said, but more or less what the future of the movement would be, and how to keep all these young boys together and form a monastic movement, and all of these things. And one day, just a few days before the passing of Sri Ramakrishna, Swamiji thought to himself, didn't say it out loud, simply thought to himself, if in the midst of this great suffering, even now he can proclaim that he's an avatar, then I'll believe it. So he had doubts up to the very end. Now Sri Ramakrishna knew, somehow, he used to say he could look into the heart of a person, the mind of a person, the way people look through the glass case and see what's inside of it. He had that ability. So he said, "Oh my Naren, even now you have doubts." And then that famous statement, "He who is Rama, he who is Krishna, is now in his body Sri Ramakrishna." But not in your Vedantic sense. And we'll get to that later when Hari is going to ask me a question this afternoon about that. What exactly that means. Not in your Vedantic sense. Not in the sense that we can all claim, I am he, I am that. This is in a very special sense. So they were all different. Look at Swami Yogananda. He had a slightly doubting type of nature. And Sri Ramakrishna, when all of the future monastic disciples were with him, he spoke burning words of renunciation. And this renunciation of lust and gold and all of that. Then the yogin, he was the only direct disciple who lived within walking distance of Sri Ramakrishna. They lived right in that village. They were a very well-known family. This Shubarna Chaudhary family, I don't know why, but some very highly respected Brahmin family. So he would very often go and sometimes spend the night there in Sri Ramakrishna's room or on the veranda, something like that. So one night, he saw Sri Ramakrishna get up in the middle of the night and walk towards Nahavat, where Holy Mother stayed. And then he said, this horrible doubt came into my mind. I knew it was terrible, but I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't get it out of my mind. That by daytime he's talking about renunciation of lust and gold. At night he's going to visit his wife in Nahavat. So he positioned himself in a certain place so he could spy and watch and see what happened. And then he saw Sri Ramakrishna walk right past the Nahavat to the pine grove, and they had to answer the call of nature. And then he came back, and Sri Ramakrishna saw him and knew exactly what the whole deal was. And Yoga Maharaj knew that Sri Ramakrishna knew, and in great shame he hung his head and was so embarrassed, and he thought that he would get a great scolding. And Sri Ramakrishna said that, no, don't feel bad, I'm not the least bit upset that you did it. He said, one must observe a sadhu by day and by night before one can believe in him. So he had all different types, and he had all different reactions. Also with Swamiji, he said, yes, test me. Don't accept a single thing that I say without testing it. Test me like the money changers test their coins. Did they do that in India? They would bite it.
Yes.
Yeah, bite it to find out if it's real metal, something like that. So test me as the money changers test their coins. Very nice expression. Don't accept a thing that I say without testing it. So we have all different types. We have Girish and Ramchandra as two householder disciples that whatever he said, that was it. And of course Latu Maharaj said like that. But even with Latu Maharaj, he did very hard spiritual practices to attain his God realization. So, which is the only way to really get rid of doubt. The Vidyate Sarva Samshaya. This is only through God realization do we get rid of doubt completely. Otherwise, we can have a type of intellectual conviction about something or intuitive conviction about something, but the proof of it doesn't come until we have this ultimate God realization. Almost all of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, except for Latu Maharaj and maybe Elder Gopal, were Western educated, and they were used to this idea of questioning things. So Swami Sharananda writes in the Great Master regarding Sri Ramakrishna, those people who critically analyze the events of the Master's wonderfully unique life will ultimately find their power of judgment baffled, stupefied, and spellbound. Then he writes, we also had no lack of doubts. So sometimes we think that, oh, how can we doubt what Sri Ramakrishna said? If they could doubt, we can doubt. If we say, oh, I have no doubts, do we think that we're that brilliant, that we've understood everything that he said, that we have no doubts about it? Yeah. Or sometimes people will say, was he an avatar? We'll say, yes, I know he was an avatar. Sri Ramakrishna used to laugh at Girish and Ramchandra. He said, oh, you say I'm an avatar. One is a doctor and the other is an actor on the stage. So what does that mean? What is it to say that? When the great pundits came years ago and declared it, then it meant something. So for us to say, yes, I have no doubt, we don't even know what it means. It's nice that we have that faith and everything, but we shouldn't get too carried away with it. Anyhow, he said, we also had no lack of doubts, and we think that at present no one would dare to test the Master as we did. So all of these Western educated young men, it often happened that many of us who doubted the Master and challenged him were defeated, and we had to hang our heads in shame. Now there's another great value to doubt, and this is from a philosophical point of view. There's something called radical doubt, and there's certain philosophical systems that start with this radical doubt. And it's also, if we think about it, Vedanta really begins that way. It begins with this idea, what is the one thing that is beyond doubt? Our own existence. This is why in if we have this option in Vedanta to either start with this physical universe, material universe, as our reference point and as our reality, and try to explain everything else through that. Or consciousness. That we started with consciousness. Consciousness is the one thing that we can't doubt. It is the one thing that's self-evident. The existence of the universe, it exists, of course, as an experiential counterpart. We have an experience, and this is what something seems to be behind it, giving us this experience. We know it only as a phenomenal existence. We don't know to use the Western language, we don't know the thing in itself. We only know it as it appears to us. What it actually is, we don't know. So, in Western philosophy, the one philosopher who raised this to the highest level was Descartes. He started this, he really founded this idea in the West of this starting with radical doubt. We doubt absolutely everything. What is it that is beyond doubt? That's the only thing that we can use as the start of things. So the evidence of the senses can be faulty. So we can doubt that. Then our common sense understanding of this universe may be completely wrong. So he says, what is the one thing that exists undeniably in the midst of doubt? So if I doubt something, the doubter has to be, at least my doubt proves the existence of the doubter, right? Proves the existence of so he has Kokido ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I doubt, therefore I am. There's a very nice, it's a little bit of a long quotation, but I'm going to read it because I like it very much. This was from something called "Of the Things of Which We May Doubt." This is René Descartes, a great mathematician and philosopher. He said, "But it may be said perhaps that although the senses occasionally mislead us respecting minute objects, and such as are so far removed from us as to be beyond the reach of close observation, there are yet many other of the informations of the truth of which it is manifestly impossible to doubt." Okay, so in general, we trust our senses. There may be things too small to see or too far to see, but just in general, we trust it. For example, that I am in this place, seated by the fire, clothed in a winter dressing gown, that I hold in my hand this piece of paper with other intimations of the same nature. But how could I deny that I possess these hands and this body, and withal escape from being classed with persons in a state of insanity, whose brains are so disordered and clouded by dark bilious vapors as to cause them pertinaciously to assert that they are monarchs when they are actually in the greatest poverty, or that they are clothed in gold when destitute of any covering, or that their head is made of clay, their body of glass, or that they are gourds. I should certainly be not less insane than they are, were I to regulate my procedure according to examples so extravagant. Though this be true, this is the important part, I must nevertheless here consider that I am a man, and that consequently I am in the habit of sleeping, and representing to myself in dreams those same things, or even sometimes others less probable, which the insane think are presented to them in their waking moments. How often have I dreamt that I was in these familiar circumstances, that I was dressed and occupied this place by the fire, when, in reality, I was lying undressed in bed. At the present moment, however, I certainly look upon this paper with eyes wide open. The head which I now move is not asleep. I extend this hand consciously and with express purpose, and I perceive it. The occurrences in sleep are not so distinct as all this. But I cannot forget that at other times I have been deceived in sleep by similar illusions, and attentively considering those cases, I perceive so clearly that there exist no certain marks by which a state of waking can ever be distinguished from sleep, that I feel greatly astonished, and in amazement I almost persuade myself that I am now dreaming. And yes.
What was the last sentence again?
The last sentence is that, but I cannot forget that at other times I have been deceived in sleep by similar illusions. In the waking state, we can say that, how could I possibly believe that that was true? I was flying in midair, and all sorts of crazy things were happening. I was seeing people who haven't been alive for 100 years. But in the midst of the dream, it's perfectly logical. We don't question these things. So he says, I cannot forget that at other times I have been deceived in sleep by similar illusions. And attentively considering those cases, I perceive so clearly that there exist no certain marks by which the state of waking can ever be distinguished from sleep, that I feel greatly astonished, and in amazement I almost persuade myself that I am now dreaming. Now, in one of the types of Vedanta vichara, this discrimination, is to look at the nature of the self throughout the states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And we conclude that the only constant reality, real self, is not the one dwelling within this waking body or dwelling within that dream body, but the witnessing consciousness. So we come to a slightly different conclusion. His conclusion is, I think, therefore I am. The Vedanta will say that even this I is an object of consciousness. So what we end up with is pure consciousness itself. In that way. Yes?
So following, so did I understand that if, according to the card, he is dreaming and at that moment he thinks that is the reality.
Yes.
So that is the reality? Is he saying that?
What he's saying is that I take this world to be so real that I've no doubt about the reality of this present experience, that I'm really sitting here, that I have no other existence at all.
Okay.
But I remind myself that in dream I had the same conviction that that was really who I am, that that was the absolute reality. There was no question about it. When I woke up, I saw how wrong I was. That it was just a dream. That I wasn't really there while I thought I was walking around and doing so many things. I was actually asleep in bed. Because now, when I'm awake, I'm identifying with a different body. That same I got transferred to the dream body. So that now, how can I be so convinced and sure that this is the ultimate reality, that I won't wake up from this also and see that, this was also a dream, cosmic dream. That when we attain realization, that we won't also see that, I thought this was so real that it's really nothing like what I thought it was. But what is not open to doubt is the awareness that is present during both the dream and the waking state, and even the dream to sleep state, as the witness. And that's the real source of my sense of identity as I. It's not, if my sense of identity were based entirely on this particular body, then I wouldn't think I'm the same person. I wouldn't say I dreamt that I did that. So the I that's in common, there's something in common to the two, which are completely different. One is an imagined body, it may even look different, maybe something completely, maybe an animal even, something like that. So it's not this physical body that accounts for our sense of I, it's this consciousness. There was a great statement by, I think, Lao Tzu, the father of Taoism, that he said, I had a dream last night that I was a butterfly. And it was so real, and I was so convinced that I was a butterfly, that now I'm wondering, am I a man who dreamt that I was a butterfly, or am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man?
Wow.
Yeah. The only difference between the dream state and the waking state is that in the waking state we remember the dream state. In the dream state we're not aware of this other existence of the bed that we're lying in and that physical body that's sleeping. We're not aware of it at all. When we wake up, we can remember that, oh, I thought I was doing this in that dreamed body and everything. Otherwise, from an experiential point of view, there's no difference between the two. But this Descartes never drew any conclusions about the reality of the world from this. He was trying to establish this idea that what is the one thing that we can't question? We can question the relative reality of this external world, but we can't question that I, the questioner. But that's the one thing that will definitely be there. Now, the major difference between Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy in general, a very general statement, is that Descartes and people like him were trying to establish some type of philosophical truth. Whereas in Eastern philosophy, everything is geared towards realization, transformation, liberation. That there has to be some practical result from it. And because of that, it has to be tied in with ethical and moral behavior. All of these things were very secondary. We don't, aside from the theological theologians, religious philosophers and everything, we don't find too much in the way of transformation, or the need to lead a very spiritual type of life. Many of them had their spiritual, religious convictions. Some were very political also, but philosophy was an end in itself. In the Eastern tradition, there has to be this ultimate goal that knowing the truth will lead us to some type of liberation or some type of high experience, or at least form the groundwork for some spiritual practices which will lead us to something higher than that. So, someone like Descartes, the next one would come along and find flaws and refute it, that's all, because that Shraddha really wasn't there unless they belonged to the same philosophical school. Otherwise it was the opposite. The philosophy in the West was more or less one philosophical position, the other one come and establish it by refuting the other. Of course we have that, we saw that with the schools of Vedanta. They also tried to defeat each other, but they would have their own traditions and their own Guru Paramparas and their own disciples that would continue. We have it a little bit in the West, but this idea of Shraddha, where you try to see the other person's point of view, is a little bit absent. It was more, let me find the faults in the other person's point of view and establish my position that way. But we find that both from a spiritual point of view, from a philosophical point of view, if we start with this idea of doubt, start with this idea of questioning, then we can have a very firm foundation for our spiritual life and for our conclusions, philosophical conclusions, if we've utilized that doubt and that questioning in the proper way, so that we end up with something that we feel is unshakable. Yes, this is the one thing that can't be doubted. Then we have a starting point. That way. Yes.
I can ask this question later, Maharaj.
You can ask it now.
Okay. So in the Western, since you know about this so much, in the Western philosophy then, so long as it is logically consistent, or according to any philosopher, they are pretty happy with that, and they do not have to know if it is truthful also or not. Is that correct? I mean, so these modern theories, there is this Gödel's theorem, etc., which says that anything which is consistent within itself cannot prove if there is a reality beyond it or something like that. So if it is consistent, they are happy with it. Is that correct? Because in Indian philosophy, we can always say it is consistent, but then ultimately we say, what is the proof? What is the taste of realization? Like you are saying, that is a distinction. So nobody doubts that, these great philosophers, Kant and everybody, so long as it is consistent, relevant, and I understand it, and that's where they stop?
If by consistent you mean internal consistency.
And logical,
Yeah.
and yeah.
No,
Like
they're trying to come up with a framework, theory that's consistent with reality, with their understanding of reality. Maybe a different way of looking at it, and a different way of understanding it. But no, they're trying to come up with something that's true
Yeah.
also.
Okay.
But
True.
not necessarily something that will radically change the life of the person who believes it. So the utility of it may be a completely different question. Some of them, of course, had a philosophy that led to a political point of view also, and it was supposed to change, society. That had some ramifications. Others were pure philosophers, like pure mathematicians. The pure mathematician doesn't really care very much about application,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there were pure philosophers also like that. So some would be more of that school. Now take someone like Hegel.
Yeah.
He was kind of a pure philosopher, and Marx very closely followed him and was the most social of all philosophers.
Yep.
Yeah. So you'll see that range there in the West also. Many were social philosophers, many were economists also, and applied their philosophy. So someone's philosophy is the highest utility, is the greatest good for the greatest number. And they would have a economic system that would reflect that, where they would try to raise the highest number of people, not caring, about the few or too high or too low, something like that. So it would result in an economic theory also. So we see both. Yeah.
But in India, and I know you have mentioned it yesterday several times, you do not, you can be a philosopher, yet almost always we have linked it with the so-called experiment, realization of whatever, whether it is a very beautiful intellectual philosophy such as Shankara's.
Yes.
And it is consistent, it makes sense, because Shankara logically defeated everybody.
Mm.
But Shankara did not have to have a realization to do that. But yet Shankara went ahead, and I'm pretty sure he was himself a Ramakrishna person. But why would the Indians do anything different? I mean, why did they not
See,
stop?
philosophy and religion were never two separate things in India.
Right. Historically,
Historically. We don't have any examples really of just philosophers who weren't part of a religious or spiritual tradition.
On the other hand, in the West, with Christianity, which is more 2,000 years old, and many of these philosophers are in the Middle Ages and 19th century, they didn't have Christianity did not have their own inborn great intellectuals who would also...
No, they did. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustus, but they started with text. It was more hermeneutical. It was more, that's why we call it theology rather than philosophy.
Okay.
But they were the medieval philosophers, but they were required to explain, statements from the Bible and things like that. So they couldn't start out with this idea of radical doubt and ultimate things, but they would deal with these other questions of eternity and creation and things like that.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the relationship between Shraddha and Samjaya. So it has a very positive side, it has a very negative side. And if our Shraddha is based, if we start out with this idea that we'll question things, that we don't want to simply accept, we accept something without questioning it, it's a very flimsy type of acceptance, we can give it up also. So we want to develop some conviction regarding not necessarily the truth of something, but the utility of it. So we may not understand exactly why and how this will lead to something higher, but we're convinced that others have followed this path and they've become transformed and they've reached the highest goal, attained liberation through it. We see people who are doing it. So we become convinced of the utility of it. Yes, let me try it. So this is how we start, and we'll get to these other concepts. Okay, Mata. This is not such an important concept, but we hear it so much from Sri Ramakrishna. Doto ma toto pat. We've all heard this. They actually made a film with this title. Did anybody see it? I saw it years ago. In the 70s it came out. On the life of Sri Ramakrishna. It was called Doto ma toto pat. As many faiths, so many paths. Now, what exactly do we mean by this term mata? It comes from man, to think, or to have an opinion, to have a feeling about something. Sometimes it means to have a wrong understanding of things also. And so it has this wide range of meaning. Anything from an idea, a concept, a doctrine, a philosophical standpoint, a principle of something. And it's very important to try to make a distinction between what is a real conviction, what we would take to be some ultimate type of truth, and what we take to be a standpoint, a viewpoint, even an opinion. I'll read a very nice thing from Spiritual Talks. These were recorded conversations with Swami Turiyananda. It was very beautiful. One afternoon, Swami Turiyananda and Ujjwala, this is Ida Ansel. Ida Ansel was one of those who took notes of Swamiji's lectures, and in shorthand, and not nearly as well as Goodwin did, but anyhow, later they were written down with Swami Ashokananda's help, and we have many of the lectures of Swamiji's from San Francisco and Los Angeles, from California, were recorded by Ida Ansel. So that was her, and she had some type of disability, yeah, but she was very close with Swami Turiyananda in San Francisco. And, so one afternoon, Swami Turiyananda and Ujjwala just happened to meet. He asked her, Ujjwala, are you deep or shallow? Do you live and die in words, or do you live and die in principles? Before she could think of an answer, he added, everyone, whoops, make a mental note of this. This is a very important thing. In matters of opinion, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand firm as a rock. Yeah, yeah. So I'll repeat that again. In matters of opinion, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand firm as a rock. And Ujjwala later commented, that was all, but he had given me in a moment guidance for a lifetime. Now, one of the problems that we have is that we confuse what is mata with what is a real principle. There's real conviction, vishwas. So we see that this term, mata, when Sri Ramakrishna uses it, he's using it specifically with regard to the different religions of the world. Because he'll even mention Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and he'll give the example of taking water from the bathing god and using different terms for it like that. But it also will include all of these other traditions that I was mentioning before. People look down upon as Kartavajja and Hushpara and all of that, because there are also traditions, faith traditions, and there are also paths. But he says they don't enter into the mansion through the nice way. They go through the tree that way. But still, there's still a path. And what I was trying to say yesterday is that we have to include Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, and Advaita Vedanta, we have to consider them as matas.